If you've ever heard of RWBY but never got around to watching it, then now more than ever would be the best time to do so. I'm not talking about the web series that's been around for almost 9 years now, but instead the anime remake that's being handled by an absolutely stacked team of creatives. A group of artists and directors from across the industry whose collective talent may surprise even you. Before we get to that though, I think it's only fair to pay my respects to the man who created RWBY, the legendary mind responsible for this immersive world of fantasy, Monty Young. Unfortunately, Monty had passed away far too early, but the incredible works of art he left behind will forever be remembered as part of his legacy. I mean, I can honestly say that if not for the impact RWBY had on me when I was younger, I probably wouldn't have ever started watching anime at all. Everything from the world and its lore, all the way to the characters and weapons they were using, was a captivating vision of fantasy I'd never experienced before. It had showed me there was much more to animated series than what Western media had led me to believe there was. So, when I saw that RWBY would be getting its own anime version of the original, I couldn't help but be excited to see this old passion of mine be reimagined into one of my favorite mediums. Yes, part of RWBY's original charm was the stylized CGI used for the animation, but I feel this transition into 2D can be a positive one. Those who were off-put by its seemingly amateur style in the beginning can now witness all of it in a more polished form. Now, that's not to say that the original wasn't well made, but I can understand why some would be hesitant to start it. Even with some of the best choreographed fights I've had the pleasure of watching, the crude design of the initial volumes just may not be appealing to some. For me personally though, part of what made RWBY so special for all these years was the visible improvements the team had made with each consecutive season. It was clear that even without Monty to guide them forward, the passion to continue his legacy still remained after. So, just knowing how much work went in to bring RWBY to the point it is now, well, that's a heartwarming thought I'm sure all of us can smile at. If you're someone who doesn't know RWBY at all, the setting is pretty much based in a futuristic fantasy, one that essentially culminates in this epic battle between good versus evil. On one side you have the soulless Grimm and their constant pursuit for destruction, and the other you have humanity and their teams of huntsmen and huntresses. It's these skilled hunters who work together to fight the Grimm and protect humanity. A key thing to note about how they operate, though, is that most possess a power known as a semblance, an expression of their soul that manifests into reality as these unique abilities. So, in addition to weapons that often double as both range and melee types, these hunters also possess their own personal superpower. Where that brings us to then in Volume 1 is the debut of a new team of huntresses called RWBY. 4 students whose unlikely encounter at the academy leads to the creation of the core cast of characters. It's after they first meet during their schooling to become huntresses that the group will undergo the standard training and tournament arc, then proceed into progressively darker themes as the story continues. There's quite a few twists and turns that add unexpected surprises to this overarching story of good versus evil. Aside from that though, RWBY also does well to develop a lot of its characters. It's a highly character-driven series that likes to explore the dynamic and relation between them. So, in addition to the grand plot that's constantly being built upon, you'll also have plenty of subplot focusing on the main cast, side characters, and even villains. Almost every significant character gets their fair share of screen time, making for this lively world in which every action has intent and purpose. Now, I don't know how well the anime will be able to portray all this, but the team behind it certainly looks talented enough to. I mean, Studio Shaft alone is a name I'd be happy to leave any anime with. Combine that with the directors from Monogatari and staff from popular series all across the industry, and what you have is a recipe for quite the successful anime. Plus, with the foundations of a quality story already there, all that's left is to adapt those elements into a way that does the original justice. Perhaps even improve upon it. As for the cast of voice actors, trust me when I say most are voiced by talents a lot of you will be familiar with. Like, if you've been watching Spy Family this season, you'll instantly recognize the main character's voice as yours. So, if you were worried about the anime not being able to capture the dynamic of the original, I do believe they've got that covered. Now, with all that said, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering how the anime will be different. I mean, it's only natural a remake into a completely different medium will result in a different product no matter how faithful it is. Well, after having watched the first 3 episodes, I can tell you that despite it being slightly rushed, the anime does do justice to the original. Most of the core story points are being covered, but the speedy pace in which they're adapting it does leave out a lot of the more intricate stuff. It seems that in exchange for focusing on a coherent, overarching story, the anime has decided to leave behind a lot of the gimmicks that made RWBY so charming in the first place. When it comes to the animation, while the fight scenes are absolutely phenomenal in a way you'd expect from Studio Shaft, it is limited by the constraints of being an anime. Much of the spectacular choreography we got to see in the original would simply take too much time and effort to draw here. So, despite the action being a little bit different, I understand why the anime can't deliver every fight in the exact way it was in the original. Now, the last thing worth mentioning about the anime is that they're going to be adding their own additional story elements to it. You see, while yes, this is definitely a remake of the original, it's not going to be a 100% accurate one. Instead, what we're getting is a canonically adjacent retelling of it, something that will eventually veer off into a slightly different direction. What I mean is that, along with the introduction of new characters and types of Grimm, the anime will also have a more central focus on Weiss's character. It's supposed to be a bold new adventure taking place after the events of Volume 2. So, even if you're someone who's seen all of RWBY multiple times, there's a whole new story here that you might find interesting. A brand new experience intended to exist alongside the original one. For those of you who haven't watched the original at all though, while I do recommend going back and giving it another shot, you don't need to watch it to understand this. RWBY Ice Queendom is a brand new creation of its own. It starts from the very beginning, establishes the lore of the world that's most important, then proceeds into its own story as the new creators intended, all while doing its best to remain faithful to the original. That's what this new RWBY anime is going to be. So, now that you know a bit more of what to expect, I hope you'll be more willing to give it a shot now. And if you do, be sure to let me know in the comments what you guys thought about it. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say for it. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!